welcome to another video, and today we are going to talk about what it means to be a witch and what the definition is, and we're gonna like get into this. Welcome to an academic video, because that's what this is gonna be. I'm gonna try really hard to not turn this into a history of witchcraft class, because I can do that, but like too much, too soon. I don't want to come on too strong. So if someone were to ask me what is a witch? What is, like, let's just start here. What is a witch? To me, a witch is someone that believes that everything around us has energy, and thus everything around us, we can interact with that energy, whether that's plants, animals, otherworldly creatures such as like spirits, ghosts, memories, thought forms like money or capitalism or greed. All of these things that are things that we can interact with on a regular basis. And to be a witch is to believe that we can kind of work with, pull, tug, look at, interact with in all sorts of ways those energies around us, kind of bending our own reality to what it is we wish to see. And from here, what I kind of want to do, we're gonna go into this teacher style. Yes, you're about to see me talk about a whiteboard. Talk on a whiteboard. Please ignore the fact that it is a calendar. But what I want to do is kind of start at a place of definition so we kind of know where we're going. Okay, so as we're talking about witchcraft and as I'm kind of defining what witch means, there's a couple of vocab words that I want to talk about. One of the main words that you're going to hear me say is earth-based tradition. So, in the context of a bunch of different traditions that could fall into the idea of witch or witchcraft, this is going to be the umbrella term for a lot of them. So earth-based tradition is exactly kind of how it sounds. It is a tradition that is based on interaction and respect of the earth. One of the main tenets of an earth-based religion is animism. Animism is the practice of, is not a doctrine, so to speak. And when I say doctrine, I mean a set of rules that we abide by. So it's the difference between like a religion and a spirituality. Religion has doctrine, spirituality does not. So animism is more of a spirituality theory or premise that everything around us has spirit that we can interact with. The earth, animals, plants, everything has a spirit that we can respect, communicate to, including us, and we are kind of amongst the same spirit as all of these creatures and beings and entities around us. So most earth-based traditions abide by animism in general. So think of this as kind of the umbrella term for a bunch of traditions across the world, more or less. If we're going to compare it for clarity, we can compare it to Christianity is the umbrella term. And then underneath that are a bunch of different paths and different ideologies, such as Catholicism, Lutheran, Protestant, etc. So this is kind of the main umbrella term that we go for. A lot of the times when I talk about witchcraft or I talk about the history of witchcraft, I will default to the words earth-based tradition, because that is way more inclusive than witchcraft practice, pagan practice, etc. And I'll explain what those mean too. So from here, this is where we identify the idea of a witch. A witch is using the idea of animism and earth-based tradition kind of under this umbrella that we can interact with the spirits around us. Spirits being any animal, creature, plant, spirit, thought, honestly, entity in that way. Like think of like American gods, like money is a thought and we interact with it on a spiritual level when we participate in it. So I'm not just talking about like talking to animals in the woods and stuff and hugging trees. I'm talking about like every single thing in the world around us has a spirit and we can interact with it on a very connected basis. So one thing that I want to mention is that witchcraft and being a witch is an engagement. It is not a doctrine. Doctrine in this case being a set of rules. So this is kind of where the difference between religion and spirituality lies. Religion has doctrine, it has rules, it kind of has parameters that you stay within, whereas spirituality does not.
Spirituality very frequently doesn't have rules. It bends, it flows, it interacts with the actual practitioner in a way that keeps people, what is the word? It keeps it more fluid and authentic to the person. You can kind of see me now. I'm gonna bend over a little bit. So with this, separate from this is pagan. So when I identify as, when I identify in any way, cool. I identify as a witch first and then a pagan. So if you'll notice, when I said witch and witchcraft, there was no indication whatsoever that I was worshiping deity. There's no requirement of that. Basically, that's where pagan comes in. Pagan basically means polytheistic. In some regions, that's also heathen. There's a lot of different words for it, a lot of which are actually being reclaimed. Pagan is definitely one of those that's being reclaimed because it used to be an insult, same as witch. So I am pagan because I believe in multiple pantheons. I believe in multiple deities. I deal with pantheons. I work with Greek pantheon and the Nordic pantheon. And so I identify as a pagan. However, pagan does not imply witch. So you can be a pagan witch, or you can be a pagan, or you can be a witch. So just to kind of like make this clear, you can be a witch and not believe in any deities. You can believe in energy. You can have an idea that, like, you know, you don't necessarily have to have an idea that there is a god, a goddess, a master spirit, a spirit of the universe. You don't have to have this idea that there is like a deity ascended outside of you. You can have this belief, this practice based specifically on animism, that there's spirit with outside of you, but you don't necessarily need to work with deity. So that is a huge misconception in the witchcraft world, is that if witch, then goddess worship, right? Not the case at all. Not the case at all. There's so many people that I know specifically that don't work with deity at all. They work with themselves. It's why in a lot of circle calls you hear a lot of people say I call to my higher self, because you don't necessarily want to be exclusive to people who don't believe in deity, you know? Way different premise. So also, you can have pagans who are not specifically witches. And this is where I want to get into a really important point. In earth-based traditions, this encapsulates tons of different practices. So it's Nordic paths. It can be Hellenistic or Greek, Roman mythology. It could be more Southern Appalachian practices. It could be Voodoo, Yoruba, Ifa. All of these practices fall under earth-based traditions because they have the idea that everything has a spirit and you can work with it. However, even though my definition of witch and witchcraft can kind of cuddle those into them, it could probably fall under the line of witch, I would never use those terms. I mean, I have in the past, and I understand now kind of what I'm doing by that. It's kind of linguistic imperialism. You do not want to use the term witch exclusively and assigning that term to a lot of earth-based traditions, because in many practices, one, they have their own word for that, and two, in a lot of practices, especially in African-based traditions, that is still a persecuted term. You would never necessarily want to call somebody a witch or a practicer of witchcraft when in fact they have a different tradition, like they're Yoruban, for example, or you wouldn't want to use our words, ours meaning white imperialist, more or less, based in Western Europe tradition, right, on practices that would fall under earth-based tradition but not necessarily at all fall under witchcraft, even though we are people who categorize and they might fall under the definition. So I speak of them here because there are tons of people who overlap the two, right? There's so many people who consider themselves witches who are in these traditions. However, it is not my space to call them a witch. It is their space. That's what I want to say here, is that there is a reason witch isn't the big umbrella. That's my 2 cents. one thing that I want to mention with Earth-based tradition is that Earth-based tradition has this rule of animism, right? That we're all, like, everything has a spirit and we can interact with it. The other main principle is that we're not trying to ascend out of this world. In practices like Christianity, I'm not trying to pick on Christianity, it's just a really great example because a lot of people are familiar with it. Your goal is to leave this humanly form, right? It's your goal to live a sinful life, whatever that means. Sinful, ha 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 ha, that was a good slip. Sinless life, so that you can ascend into heaven, into the heavenly plane where more or less your soul is with God, right? You know, there's practices even way back to Plato at the idea of like the soul is the most pure form of yourself. And so this meat suit that you're stuck in really is just a hindrance because what you want is your soul to be as clean and as pure as possible. A lot of traditions have that mentality. Earth-based traditions typically do not. You are not trying to ascend, you're not trying to get out, you're not trying to find a place that is, quote, better than this. You are here, you are present. I will use this example to get a little nerdy with it. In Final Fantasy VII, if you've ever played that game, there's something called the life stream. It's this essence called Mako, which more or less is the energy of the earth. You can hear it crying because it's in pain in the game. In the game, every person, every creature, every piece of nature has the life stream within them. When you die, you return to the life stream and continue to feed the energy of the earth. Very frequently. I mean, like, look, that's a video game premise. It's just a really good way to explain it. I always, like, when I was little, I more or less said that I followed the life stream religion because it just made the most sense to me. But that is just an example. A lot of earth-based traditions have this mentality. You're not trying to ascend out of. You're not trying to get out of a sinful body. You're not trying to demean anything that might be considered sinful by other practices. So like your body is not this negative thing. Sex is not a negative thing. You are here, you are now. It is vital to survival. It's vital to creation. It's vital to life as a human. So that is another main premise of an earth-based religion, is you're not trying to kind of like tap out. It's kind of a shitty way to say that, but you're not trying to like ascend, right? You're not trying to ascend to a higher plane. Of course, we're trying to like ascend into better human beings, but it's not like this destination that we go to and like, we're good, you know? The last thing is Wicca. The one thing that I like about the term Wicca is that one theory of where the term Wicca came from is that, or even the term witch came from, is that the root word is Wicca, so W-I-C-C-E, which means to bend. And so for me, whenever I kind of explain what witchcraft and what witches mean, or what magic means and spell work means, so many people I think of the like TV version where you snap your fingers and something appears. I wish, that would be amazing. And it's less that and more the ability to bend reality. It's not that you're trying to completely rewrite fate, if you believe in fate. It's not that you're trying to kind of like make something completely manifest out of air. It's that you're trying to bend the circumstances so that it kind of leans in your favor, kind of thing. So a lot of witchcraft is done like an inch at a time, in my opinion, in my experience. So that's one thing I like about the word Wicca and about like that tradition. So one big misconception is if witch, then Wiccan. No, incorrect. I am a great example of that. I am not Wiccan. Never have been. Wicca is a doctrine. How I mentioned earlier, it has a set of rules. It has a set of policies, more or less. The threefold law is a really great example of that. That which you put out comes back to you times 3. But Wicca is a practice. It is a practice that was created more or less starting in the 1930s-ish, and then carried and gained huge popularity in the 50s and 60s and during like civil rights movements, more or less. So this is a doctrine. This is a type, basically it's a Catholicism, right? If we have the umbrella of Christianity, it's one of the ones that falls underneath it. And so that is more or less like most people start with Wicca because it's something that's easy to process. It's something that kind of has rules, that gives you a boundary so you can feel safe as you enter this witchcraft practice. But that's what it is. You do not have to be Wiccan in order to be a witch. But very frequently, Wiccans are witches. All of this is so confusing. I hope my whiteboard helped. Oh my gosh.
The reason why it's kind of difficult to talk about what a witch is and kind of put boundaries on it and talk about it without talking about its history is that it has a very transient and different history. The witch as we know it, more or less, is a bunch of different identities. On one hand, it's a fictional character that's also put in the same category as monsters and mythology and the enemy, more or less, the othered one. It's also this other character that we know as the midwife, the caretaker, the soothsayer, the shaman in the middle of the town, the person that we get answers from, that's been documented. It hasn't always been under the word witch, but it's always been this archetype that we've gone to, the person who walks between worlds, right? So we have this fictional character, we have this real character, we also have these archetypes of these powerful goddesses and these women who step up into their power and, you know, look into the face of God and say no. We have all of these different things that kind of blend into what a witch is, that is both like, you know, fictional and romantic and, you know, every single articulation that we see on television or in movies, we have that archetype, and it's also placed in with this really real practice. And that's something we can't necessarily take out of the word witch. We can't take that context out. Witch itself has been a derogatory term for a really long time. Same with pagan, same with heathen, same with more or less any kind of definer of this category that we're speaking about today. People have been murdered and are still murdered over the use of these words. And that is something that we can't necessarily take out of our current experiences as a witch. It's something that I don't see very often in conversations about witchcraft or in introductions to witchcraft or honestly just like in this arena in general. Very much there's this idea of like, oh, you're a witch, welcome, come on in. Here's a bunch of things to learn. Here's a bunch of things to kind of move forward. Here's how to do spells. Here's how to do a bath that'll make you feel really great. Here's how to like cleanse yourself. And it's very much all of this forward moving manifestation energy kind of vibe. I hate the term vibe, but it makes sense in this circumstance. However, there's not a movement to pay attention to where everything comes from. The fact that the witch as an archetype has always been an other, has always been someone who lives on the outskirts of town, who will do the work that nobody wishes that they would do, who would do the things that the townspeople ask of her, but at the same time be ostracized for that same reason, even though they need her for that reason. There really is this context and this history of being the person who will do the dirty work, because to be a witch is to honor the energies that are around you. And very frequently the energies are not of manifestation and happiness and glory, and it's not all of this beautiful, wonderful stuff. You deal with what is present because you're not trying to get to an afterlife. You're not trying to excel and ascend out of it. You are here. You're here to make the world a better place now. There is this implicit history of justice in the identity of a witch that I think gets ostracized a lot. Especially because there is a tendency to glaze over the history of the persecuted one of all sorts, because it is so easy, quote unquote, at least in America, speaking as a white person in America, it is so easy to identify as a witch in this common era, right? There is a tendency to kind of put it in the self-help category, where it's not necessarily a religion where you're carrying the burdens of that religion, and it is your role to step forward and move that religion into a specific, better, more helpful, more inclusive, more justice-oriented, more welcoming space. There's a tendency to kind of want to use the witch title and the language of the witch, whether that be ritual, crystals, I mean, name anything, to use it merely as a way for you to get forward, to move forward. So that's what makes this difficult to kind of pen down. That's why it's kind of hard for me to talk about, because there is this really heavy history and all of that comes with it. You can't choose the title of witch and then ignore all of that, right? You just can't. And to do so is appropriation. Last thing that I want to say is obvious, but I want to make sure that I say it, is there is no place in this where I talk about what you need, what you look like, what you believe in, more or less. To be a witch does not mean to wear black all the time. To be a witch does not mean to have crystals and candles all over your house. To be a witch doesn't mean to have 14 altars all through your home that you pray to every single day. To be a witch doesn't mean that you go to covens. To be a witch doesn't mean that you go to metaphysical shops or read tarot. To be a witch, really, at essence, is just the belief that the energies around you have presence and you can work with them. There is a response to that. It is you being present for your life, the good and the bad, and you being willing to sit down and work with that. There is a tendency, especially I think in my circle, because I look like one of the people that you would expect to be a witch. I mean, I'm currently wearing a pentagram shirt, right? Like, there is a tendency to feel like you need to fit into a category in order to hold this title. But the thing is you don't. Any spiritual path needs to be a connection to yourself. If you are in a space where you feel like you're pressured to look a certain way or do a certain thing or feel a certain way, that's not how that's supposed to go. Spirituality connects you to yourself above all. Yourself is a beautiful and enough being, right? You are enough. And so anything that disconnects you from that or makes you feel like you're not enough because you don't abide by standards or rules is not the place that you want to be. I invite you to ask why you're there. So I just want to reemphasize, to be a witch does not mean you wear black all the time. It does not mean you have a litany of tarot cards that you keep. It does not mean that you burn candles every single day. If being a witch is held in your heart, then you are a witch. So that is where I will leave you. I'm really excited to get started on having this conversation with you. Do you identify as a witch? Did what I say resonate with you? Have you not thought about it before? I just really would love to chat with you a little bit more. You're welcome if you want to have more conversations with me and see what I'm up to and see what videos are coming next. Please follow me on Instagram at Lightbringer Rituals. You're also welcome to follow me on Twitch. I stream 4 days a week of witchcraft video games. Right now I'm playing a Norse game called Assassin's Creed Valhalla that I love. And also you're totally welcome to subscribe here. So much more content to come. And on that note, I hope you have a lovely day. I'll see you next time.